So really like, giving yourself an hour, 30 minutes to an hour every week to actually think about the work you're going to do and planning that work. A lot of people just, you make your list and then you jump right into it and you're not thinking about what do I have time for? Where's my energy? Like taking stock of all these things. So that's step one.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Indepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. This is episode 270, and you can probably see our location is a little bit different today. I'm here in Portland with Indiepreneur's Director of Operations and also our IndieX Account Strategist and an Indie Founder Coach, Jonah McLean, aka DUX.
Hey, everyone.
And we're here in the same room, which is amazing.
We're doing it.
We're super excited. We're going to be bringing a really fun episode today, talking about a topic that I think we don't touch on too often on this podcast, but whenever we get the chance to have Jonah on the show, this is naturally something that comes up, and it's about how you can organize your music business and get more done in it. And in particular, on this episode, I think we're going to touch on a topic that is, or a subtopic that I think is really interesting in this, and that's organizing your music business when you don't have a team, so that as you grow, you can onboard a team effectively. And this is something that Jonah does a lot of work on, both in his music career, in coaching students in Indie Founder, and also he's done a lot of work with us at Indepreneur in making our operations stronger. So welcome to the show, Jonah, and thank you for having me here in your studio.
Yeah, it's good to be back, man. When was the last time we did the pod? It was
almost a year ago.
Yeah, it was like last year. So I'm excited to be here. Yeah, I'm glad we can be in the same room and meet and get to hang out after working together for, 3 years.
Yeah, for sure. I'm super pumped. I think this is going to be a really insightful episode to dive into this topic because, like I said, it's really not one we get into too often. But I think artists are always thinking in the back of their minds like, oh, if I could only have a team to solve my problems, to do the things that I can't do or don't want to do or somehow can't find the time to do.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the processes that you've built and that you've helped other artists build and that you've built within Indepreneur's infrastructure as well prove that like you can get a lot done with one person, you can get a lot done with a few people, and you can get a lot more done with a team when you've got the right kind of systems and processes in place. So I'm really excited to dive into this, but I think to kick it off, one question that comes to my mind is like when it comes to planning and trying to get more done, something that a lot of artists and bands run into is like, well, where do I even start with this? Like, how do I focus on the right things?
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good kicking off point for us.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, so we just did a workshop about this in Indie Pro, as you know, and for folks that haven't checked that out, it's a really great workshop we put together. And one of the things that I talked about in the workshop was, to me, as someone that came into the Indepreneur community as a musician, as an artist, the buddy system maybe felt a little bit overwhelming in the sense that there's all these steps and all these different things that I need to do in order to have this like thriving music business that I want. One of the things that was really helpful for me, and I think that's been helpful for students and people I've worked with, is trying to zoom out a little bit on the buddy system and kind of breaking it down, almost like taking a further step back and looking at it in terms of what each phase of the buddy system is actually doing for your music business.
Sure.
And you and I had a conversation about this as well, just talking about really if you boil it down, the buddy system can be captured in 3 phases ultimately, which is creating attention, capturing attention, and then monetizing. And I think for me, for a while, I felt like I needed to do all 3, or do it all at
one
once.
time.
Yeah, just do all of it. And I think that something that was really helpful was to take that kind of zoom out and say, all right, what is going to be the most impactful thing for my music business right now? And just focus on that. So not that you're not focused on the big picture, but it's like, I need to build up this infrastructure a little bit. For me at the time in late 2020, early 2021, it was just like make content consistently, right? Like create that attention. That's something that I wasn't doing. So I think that's something that's been really helpful. And I know something we'll kind of dig in more here on the podcast, but yeah, like zooming out and understanding that you can't do it all. So using the buddy system as a helpful framework to kind of focus on where you can do the most damage,
Yeah, for sure. And we've talked about like auditing your marketing ecosystem and your buddy system and looking to see where your weak spots are and the areas of opportunity are for you to actually go and plan projects and initiatives and campaigns
Yeah.
that will start to move the needle for you. But I think it's not often brought up in the standpoint of like actually getting more stuff done. But it's a really good point, because
Yeah.
you can spin your wheels trying to get something done in your music career that you really shouldn't have been spending your time
Yeah.
and focus and energy on at all.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point. Like,
Yeah.
in the same way that you can use the buddy system as a marketing tool, and kind of the overall framework that you build your marketing on,
Yeah.
you can also use it to just be like, I need to give my career a kick in the butt here. Like,
Yeah.
what is the thing that will get me one step further than I currently am?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah, and again, for me, I think I did a couple releases working with Circa and working with Indepreneur, back in the day. In 2016, we did PR with a company then, and then Circa had started Indepreneur, and we did the album launch, and it was all a lot of work, and really like there's a lot that you need to focus on. And for me, I took after that work with Circa and really kind of like dialing in my own marketing and my own buddy system, I really just focused on like making stuff and like putting it out consistently for like 2 years. Like I really wasn't worried about too many other things. I mean, I started running some top of funnel campaigns to like market and like capture that attention, but I tried to be really comfortable and just like, let me just build up this audience. Let me learn how to get better at marketing in the meantime. And yeah, I think like for me and looking at those phases, that's step one, is like, do you have the attention you need to kind of like go to where you want to go?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think breaking down the buddy system into those 3 categories, creating attention, capturing attention, monetizing attention, kind of the 3 chains of the buddy system, is a really helpful way to zoom it out even further and not get confused about like, well, then what campaigns go into this bucket and that bucket?
Yeah.
We've talked about that on the show before. Like, that's a really great way to think about where each of the stages kind of fit into the overall picture of building a business. So I love that. So let's say, then you're an artist and you've kind of nailed down like, all right, I just don't have people listening to me. I don't have really anybody paying attention to my releases. There's nobody there. It's kind of crickets, right?
Yeah.
You've got that kind of figured out. You know that you need to start creating awareness. Let's just use that as an example. So if you were in that place, that I think the next logical thing from a getting shit done perspective is like, okay, I need to break this down and actually start working towards that goal. So then what would you recommend for someone who's going about this on their own?
Yeah.
How would they do that? Because immediately I think that's where the alarm bells would start ringing for an artist that's by themselves, or a band that's working, maybe a few people, or maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of bands where like one person is
one or two people
kind of the guy or the gal.
Yeah.
I've definitely been that person before.
Same.
So I think that's probably the next question that they would have, or the alarm bells that would start going off. That would be like, well, I need somebody to do these things.
Yeah.
What would you recommend in that position, as far as like, where do we go to actually plan a project?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think for those kinds of folks, and if I could give myself advice to like me in the past, or, me a few years ago, it's like, slow down, because at the end of the day, you can't do it all. And you can't do step B and C until you do step A, And so like my advice for people in that situation would be, don't be afraid to slow down. I think a lot of times artists and bands feel like, oh, I have this single that's so great and I need it to go viral, or my album's going to blow up, or this and that. And, or just whatever, just the pressure we put on ourselves to have our art be great and do great things. Just kind of taking a step back and allowing yourself to say, to be realistic and say, okay, like maybe I need to cultivate more of an audience before I do all these other things that I want to do, because that was the thing that I did, again, for a long time, is like I would release projects that were a ton of work. It would fall short of my expectation in terms of the response that I would get, and then I would get burnt out. So I think,
it's that roller coaster.
Yeah, just not being afraid to take a step back and understand that this, again, when it comes to planning, the first thing that I talked about in the workshop, kind of step 1, was take stock of your buddy system and really think about which phase of the 3 that you and I are talking about, creating, capturing, and monetizing attention, which is going to be the most impactful. And then from there, boiling that down into projects that you need to do to hit those goals. So if, for example, it's like, hey, we need to just create more attention, we need to be releasing more content, you need to focus on projects and things that are going to enable you to do that. So like if you're not posting and you haven't posted in 3 months, step 1 would be figuring out, how do I start posting again? And then like step 2 is like, how do I start figuring out how I can post consistently, And, you might have to spend some time on those problems. Like I ran top of funnel traffic campaigns, fan finder campaigns for 2 years, and just did that to try and stay consistent in doing something, So yeah. I think, breaking it down and again, like being patient and understanding that like you've thought about what your business needs. So pay attention to that,
Yeah, totally. No, that 100% makes sense. So, it's looking at where you're at, what your goal is, and then starting to choose like a few projects, and those don't necessarily need to be marketing campaigns.
Yeah.
They could be, I don't have enough music created, so I need to get to writing, or I need to get into the studio, or it might be I need to, I want to plan out a few marketing campaigns that I can put into place, or, if you need to just start being more active on social media, like putting that into place, and not doing it in a way that burns you out further and puts you back on that roller coaster. It's like,
absolutely,
pick a few and then go. And then I think this is the part where, in my opinion, the next part is the getting organized and getting stuff done part, where everyone kind of tends to hit a wall, especially if they're trying to focus on building a music career that is a business, maybe for the first time, or the first time that they're thinking this way of like, oh, this really is a business with like, it's something that I'm working in. It's a machine that I'm working in, just like I would work in a job. I think the organization is like, oh my gosh, there's so many different ways I could do this. Like, do I just have a notepad? Do I type up a Google sheet or use Excel? Do I use a project management tool? How do I plan this? And what have you seen to be most effective for yourself and for other artists?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple things I would say on just the like getting organized and getting things done. And I think some of it is practical and some of it is maybe a little more mindset. One of the things that's been really helpful for me is reminding myself to have fun, reminding myself that like music is fun. And even though this is a business for me and it takes a ton of time and effort and energy and there's heartache and, but it's like at the end of the day, going into it, deciding that the work you're going to do is fun. And even if it's challenging, it can still be fun. So I think that's, kind of number one out of the gate is like, you need to allow yourself to feel that way. Because if you're feeling like, oh, this is so hard and I can't do it and I'm burned out and da-da-da-da-da, like take a break, take a step back, like take a breather, you're really only going to, just burn yourself out with that even more, And then I think the other thing that I would say is in terms of your question, like, projects and how do you kind of like stay organized? So previously when we've talked about this topic, we've gone in depth on things like Scrum and different kinds of like workflows that people can be in. From working with different people and seeing the response to our workshops on Scrum and different things like that, my advice would be pick what works for you, but use it and use it well. So in other words, for me, to your question, like I use Asana and I love it. We use it for Indepreneur. I use it for my music business, and it is so great for my mind and the way I am. And I think it could be Asana or Trello or Monday, like any kind of, digital to-do list or like task software in that way.
Yeah, big love to Asana. I don't know what I would do without Asana in my life.
It's a game changer. But for some people, like they like their Google Sheet or they like their Google Doc or their Notepad or whatever it is. So one of the things I said in the workshop is like, use what feels good to you, but like be flexible enough to know when it is and isn't working. And if it's not working and you keep saying, well, this is how I like to plan my work, it's on a to-do list, try Asana, like try something else. Don't just keep putting stuff in the same place in the notebook where you lose it for the next 6 months or whatever it's going to be. So in terms of like kind of choosing your systems and how to get started, I think feel free to use what works for you, because not the same thing is going to work for everyone.
For sure.
But, have the insight to recognize when it's not and do something about it. It's like if you're planning and your projects aren't going anywhere, might be something wrong with how you're planning or executing.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good practical advice.
Yeah.
In terms of like, once you have that, like what would you recommend? Like, how do you even plan a project? Like that seems like a silly question to ask, but I think it's fundamental. Like it's easy to get lost in the, again, this is another place where it's like, oh, if I could just have someone to do it for me or tell me exactly what to do.
Yeah. So what I do for that situation, and I think, my recommendation, so when we talk about projects and we talk about your buddy system and we say, let's zoom out and look at, what areas of your buddy system need the most attention. Is it creating, capturing, or monetizing that attention? Once you have that locked in, I think it then becomes about thinking about the big projects that'll help you get there. So if it's making content, let's assume that it's, a system to generate content, right? Once you have those projects, so you've got your big picture, kind of this is the focus, then you've got your few projects that will actually help you get to that place. How do you actually start to plan that and break that down? So this is something that I've pulled from Scrum that I think is really helpful. And really, like any kind of project management, is going to have some sort of mechanism for planning and some sort of mechanism for reviewing work. I think those things arguably are more important than the time you actually spend doing the work, because that time in between when you're actually working, that's going to change. Some weeks you're going to feel great and you're going to get a ton done. Other weeks you're going to be busy or you get sick and you're not going to get a lot done.
Right.
Having a mechanism to plan your work and then review your work gives you benchmarks or kind of, bookends, if you will, to say like, okay, this is the project that I have in front of me. These are the tasks that I want to do to get closer to completing that project. You do some planning, you think about what you need to do. For me, I do try to do the same time and day every week. I meet on Friday morning with Andy or with Circa, and I really think about that and what am I going to get done this week? What's the time that I have available to myself to get it done in? Do I have other life obligations this week that are going to get in the way? So really giving yourself an hour, 30 minutes to an hour every week to actually think about the work you're going to do and planning that work. A lot of people just, you make your list and then you jump right into it and you're not thinking about what do I have time for? Where's my energy? Taking stock of all these things. So that's step one.
Yeah, there's that intermediate step after you make a to-do list.
Yeah.
Or, set up a project or think about a project. It's like, okay, well, like from there, how effectively can I actually start to tackle this?
Yeah, exactly. And so having that time for yourself, again, if you had a team, that's what you would do. You would meet with your team and plan a project, but you don't have a team and it's just you. Right. So, planning the work, obviously doing the work, I think is somewhat self-explanatory, right? Like whatever time you have available, that's what you're going to do the work in. But I think the other bookend that's important to mention in terms of how you're executing on these projects is review. And so just like I have a planning meeting, with myself or with Andy, whatever, every week, I also have a review. And that's a matter of going in and looking at what happened this week. How can I, what didn't I get to? What did I get to? How can I make it better next week? What did I not take into account this week that tripped me up? Or what were the problems I didn't think about? So it's not just this constant state of work. It's like you're planning, you're working, and you're reviewing and optimizing. You're looking at what happened. How can I get a better result next time? Do I need to schedule better? Do I need to plan better? Do I need to say no to going out on the weekend? So I have, whatever it is, like whatever the obstacles are in your life, taking stock of those things and being able to use those as inputs to your planning. So it's kind of just this cycle of like plan, work, review, repeat. And not like you're just a
robot.
Yeah, a robot, but it's just like every good system needs feedback and input. You have to have that to know what's going on and if it's working or not. And if you're doing that every week, you're going to find out really quickly what's working and what isn't.
Those are kind of like two, I would say, like mission critical touch points in any business.
Yeah.
But especially a creative business. And I'll say, like, when we start working with artists that have teams or bands that have teams at IndieX, this especially is true with bands that have like big kind of distributed teams. Maybe they're on a record label, or maybe they have like a management group and a booking agency, and there's kind of all these different cooks in different kitchens.
Yeah.
If there's not those touch points, what tends to happen, and this is really true in the music business, is it's just like email threads. Like so many email threads
about chaos.
Email chaos. And it's awful. It's such an unproductive way to work. It's a real problem that I think can come up in creative businesses. That's an example of like what happens when you don't have these foundations starting out. Yeah. And you start to build a team. All of a sudden it just becomes like really decentralized chaos where like no one knows what's working, no one knows who's working on what. Yeah. And then you try to get things done in an email, and then we have an email thread of 7 people trying to decide on a subject line.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting, right? I think that as a pro of working on your own or my own, it's like I don't have to worry about that, right? Because it's like the planning meeting is just me and the review meeting is just me. But just as you said, right? It's like as you start to bring people in and plan out work with other people, even if it is like your bandmates or your collaborators, and eventually, it's fulfillment or, a manager or whatever it is, being able to bring people into that and say, these are the systems that my business does, like this is what we're doing, is really powerful. And I think helps keep you out of the weeds with some of that stuff of like the email chaos or just like the disjointedness.
It sets the tone too of like when you, and we can get into this in a second, but like it sets the tone of like when you bring on team members, it's, I'm bringing you into my business.
Yeah.
This is how my business runs.
Yep.
It establishes you as the owner of the business.
Yeah.
And I think when you can set that tone really early on, it allows you to bring in people and bring on team members that contribute to that supplement the areas that you're weak in.
Yeah.
But they don't come in and, try to change things or put you on a process that doesn't make sense to you, or worse, just throw you into utter chaos.
Yeah.
You have the baseline set of like, this is how I do things. Like, if you can help me make them better, great.
Right.
But you won't make them worse.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think that's a good point. I was just going to say, is like, you may bring someone in that's like, what if we do it this way? And it's like, oh, great. Let's build on these systems that I already have. But yeah, to your point, it's like, you at least have that baseline of like, this is how we operate. And that it's not going to, descend into that, area of chaos.
Right,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
So, that brings me to an interesting point. And one thing I do want to say is, if you guys haven't checked out Jonah's workshop and you're not inside of Indie Pro, we'll leave a link to that in the show notes. You can catch the replay inside of the Indie Pro community. It was a badass workshop. And we got, Jonah went deeper into all of these topics than we've touched on this episode. We're kind of just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
And we'll also link in the show notes to a previous episode that Jonah and I did on these topics, where we talked a little more in depth about Scrum and those processes. If you're interested in hearing some of the more, theoretical and tactical approaches to nerdy to planning weeks down to the task and stuff like that. And it's all very good. But I think that this has been really solid advice for, building processes from kind of day one.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting here, and we kind of just started to get into, is the idea of then building a team off of this foundation, which I think is, again, like we kind of touched on at the top of the episode, is I think when I talk to most artists or musicians, bands, they usually say somewhere in their vision is like, eventually I'll build a team, or like we'll have people to help with certain things that we don't like to do or don't find ourselves to be good at. And I think that this is kind of the natural evolution of what we're talking about, is like, eventually you can take these things and use them to build a really strong team. So I wanted to kind of touch on that as like a starting point for then how you would go about doing that. Like, where would building a team start? Yeah. How would you even think about like the right first person to bring on? And this is how business owners think. It's like when you're building a business, a lot of times you're a sole operator for a little bit until you can't be anymore and you need help on a particular set of tasks or items, or you've got something that's out of your reach from a skill set level. And we don't often get into that. It just, for artists, I think it goes from like, I'm going to build a team, which means it's a manager or a booking agent. And it's kind of like, oh, just choose from the shelf of the music industry thing.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily...
Pick one off the shelf.
Yeah. But it's not necessarily the stuff that you need.
Yeah. I think for me, and obviously, I'm still new to building a team. We were talking about before this call, I still am in large part a one-man team. My wife helps out a lot, and then I recently kind of hired my first person to help me, which is fulfillment, and we'll get into that, I think, too. But to your question and to your point, for me, it was a matter of, okay, part of me having time to plan and review my work every week. When I launched my fish funnel, which I launched a few months ago now, that got really busy really fast. And what happened was I was shipping 20, 30 orders a day, and the time that I normally have for myself to do tasks and like move the business forward, like all the responsibilities that have historically been on my plate, I didn't have as much time because I was like working on this, fulfilling all these orders and just everything kind of that went with that. So for me, it was a matter of, okay, I'm doing my review and several weeks in a row here, like work's just not getting done because I don't have time. I literally just don't have time.
Yeah.
So, there's a need here in my business now, and I am making money. I have enough now that I can say, okay, well, how can I create more time for myself again to focus on the projects that I want to focus on and need to focus on? For me, that was hiring someone to do fulfillment. It ended up being the drummer in my project and one of my best friends. I was at a point where the business could afford to bring someone on. I had built these systems that were working, and in order for me to continue to maintain them and do what I needed to do, it's like, okay, this is a really clear hole that I need to fill. So I think naturally, if you're taking that time to review and you're not just in this constant state of like work chaos mode, and you're really zooming out and looking at that big picture, those things are going to become more clear to you. It's like you're going to start to see, man, like I can't get this stuff done anymore. Like, what do I do? And, whether that's hiring someone to do fulfillment, or if you're playing a lot of shows and you can, it's like, okay, the booking agent makes sense now, So again, I think kind of zooming out and really looking at the big picture and saying, hey, there's a need here that I need to fill, and let me go out and kind of try and do that,
For sure. Yeah. I think that's a really good approach, and not to shame managers or booking agents or anything like that at all.
Yeah.
Actually, I think there's a valuable lesson here for people that are managers and are managing artists, is like, when you're thinking about who the next team member to bring into an artist's business is, and, if you're a manager, you're probably helping and kind of guiding and bringing those conversations to light. I think it's a helpful framework to think within.
Yeah.
As opposed to, again, just like solving a problem that isn't really there.
Yeah.
Or, generally just pulling from like the standpoint of like, oh, well, they don't really like to do this, so like I'm going to try to outsource it or whatever. Like, whereas that may not be the actual thing that's needed right in that moment. Additionally, something else I wanted to talk about was like, this road can be lonely, right? Building a creative business can be lonely. And so like sometimes those first team members might be more like a pod of a few other artists that are kind of acting more as like accountability with each other on their systems in the stuff that you're working on together. And I know that you've done a fair bit of that in your own business. And I'd love to talk about that, because I think that kind of free team building that kind of benefits everybody is actually a really good way to start getting used to working with a team.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that working, so essentially kind of the term we're calling it accountability buddies, working with peers and people in your community to do this stuff together and like build systems together was super helpful for me. I think that having those check-ins, I didn't meet with Circa or Andy like every single week, but it's like more often than not over the last couple of years, I've had that opportunity, and it holds me accountable to my systems that I've built in terms of just like, this is when I review my work every week and plan my work every week, and like having somebody there, like you said, like they're not fully a teammate, but they're doing the same kind of thing I'm doing. I'm learning from them. They're learning from me. And it's that communication, like having someone to bounce ideas off of or like get feedback. So yeah, I would really encourage anybody that's listening or watching you don't have to feel so alone, find someone else in your community, in Indie Pro, in your local scene or whatever, that is interested in doing the same kinds, these same kinds of things as you. And hey, can we start talking about, can we meet once a week and go get coffee and like talk about the work we're doing for the band or for, that stuff's super helpful. And like you said, I think really gets you A, comfortable continuing to follow those processes, and B, working within a framework of like communicating with people about the work you're doing.
I love that. Yeah. And I think that makes like, the old saying is like, oh, can we go get coffee and I can pick your brain?
Yeah.
It takes that from being like a valueless kind of like very transactional thing where it's like one person getting ideas from another and that's it, to something that's really value driven to everybody involved, where that collaboration kind of happens. And I think it's a type of collaboration that doesn't get discussed enough in music, because when we think of collabs, it's like collab bro, like but it's not like collab bro,
let's plan and meet. And again, I honestly feel like doing that over the last, like, because now it's habit for me. I don't need Cirque and I stopped meeting, when he had the baby, and Andy, is on tour or whatever, so we miss weeks a lot, but like it's routine for me at this point. Like, it's like whether I'm, so just that to say, it's like if you can do this for 6 months to a year and meet with someone consistently and build that up for yourself, you're going to carry that with you always, as long as it's still working for you and doing good things. So yeah, I think even just the act of doing it kind of like helps you build up that repetition so that it becomes part of what you're doing, all the time.
For sure.
Yeah.
Man, I love this. This is such good stuff.
Yeah, like, I love it too, man.
It's so good to get into the weeds with this stuff every once in a while and just kind of unpack it, because it's an area where, again, it's a lofty goal that a lot of artists put in front of themselves. Like, I want to build a team eventually. But in order to do that, like, the first step is like, I need to figure out a way to get more done. I need to get things off the ground. And I mean, building a team isn't the goal. Having a business is the goal.
Exactly.
And to have a business, you need to have fans, you need to capture those fans' attention, and then you need to make some money. Like, that's the buddy system.
Yeah, and again, I think, again, for anyone, listening or watching, this isn't like to toot my own horn, but it's like, as far as what I do for DUX, I think that you would struggle to find a situation where someone would be outsourcing less than I have historically, meaning, I write all my music, I record it, I produce it, I mix it, I usually master it, I do my own video, so it's like, just that to say, you can get a lot done before you really need a team, truly, and, I think that's something that people really need to understand and lean into, is like, if you need to take 3 months, 6 months to build up skills so that you are better prepared to drive the bus for your music business, like, do that, take the time to work on the things that are going to help you get further, because if you're not doing that, then it is a need that you have to try and, I need someone to do this for me, or I need someone to do that for me. And it's
well said.
Just take a couple months and like learn it, or try, get like a base understanding, So I think that's an important point to also mention and all that,
I love that. Yeah. Something Alex Hormozy, who I listen to a lot, has said is like one of the best and most profitable investments that he's made throughout his career has been investments into himself.
Yeah,
and a lot of that takes skills. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And so I think that what you just said resonates really well with that idea too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this so much, man. Thank you so much for doing this and for unpacking.
I love it too.
And like I said, we'll link to the workshop that Jonah did inside Indie Pro in the show notes so that you guys can check it out. I really think you'll dig it. This was super fun. It was great to do a podcast together in person. So I hope you guys enjoyed getting to hear a little bit about the back end of what Jonah's doing inside of his project DUX, what we do at Indepreneur, and some of the frameworks that we teach when it comes to actually running a music business, which is different. It's different than what we talk about on this show. So I had a really good time. Speaking of running a music business and having team members, a big part of having a music career and a big part of your team likely will be your producer, your engineer, the people that are in the studio with you. And so something that I've been really digging recently is listening to our friend Casey Cavalier and his new podcast Season for the record process. So I'm going to link to that in the show notes because it reminded me what we were talking about today of some of the stories that they've been sharing. They interview artists and producers and engineers and mixers and talk about the kind of the narratives that they've woven throughout the record making process for recent records that have been released. And it's a really good show for kind of getting in the weeds of like what goes through their process and what they're thinking about as they're building songs and EPs and albums. So I'm going to link to that in the show notes. You guys got to check it out. It's really good. So we'll leave you with that. Thank you guys so much. And we'll catch you next time on Creative Juice. Peace out, Indies.
See you guys.
Can y'all really feel the East Coast, feel the West Coast, feel me? Say what?